Hello and welcome to Inside Events, an international podcast examining contemporary issues and ideas in events. So this week we're joined by Dr. Bree Newland, and we're going to be talking about environmentalism in the context of events. Welcome, Bree.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's great to see you and be here.
Thanks for coming. And we'll start off with the first question, which is who are you? What role, organizations you work for, and why are you interested in environmentalism in particular?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Bree Newland, and I am the Assistant Dean for the Division of Applied Undergraduate Studies. There you used to go. It's a mouthful. And also I am a professor in the Tisch Institute for Global Sport, where I still have a teaching role there. I got interested in environmentalism around events through a lot of my work in leveraging. So a lot of my research is focused on event leverage and how we can really achieve the triple bottom line of economic impacts, social impacts, and environmental impacts through events. But really, I saw a big gap in terms of how we approach environmental sustainability and how we approach, taking care of the environment as we bring loads of people together to celebrate and to come and socialize around an event. So that's how I got interested in this area.
And it seems like an area that has just not had as much attention in comparison with the social and economic dimensions of event impact and leveraging, right? I'm aghast at every time I look at the literature, and there's just like this glaring hole still in environmental studies. If you could kind of break down the concept of environmentalism. Sorry, there's a lawnmower going on somewhere around me. I have, of course, it had to happen right now. If you could break down environmentalism for me, just for, in a little bit of detail, just for the listeners, could you kind of break down that into kind of like maybe 2 or 3 minutes for us?
Sure. So simply put, I think it's the strategy and then the tactics that an event manager or an event itself would put together to lessen or mitigate the impact of an event on the environment. And so that can be a lot of things, right? It's carbon emissions and how do we lower those? How do we get people around the globe in a way that we either can offset the climate or the carbon emissions that are happening, or find ways to do more local or events that people don't have to travel as much. It's also waste management. It's also I do a lot of work in sport events, and so it's we're seeing the climate affect sporting events, and one of the things that they have to do now is make snow. They have to create an environment where people who do cold sports can actually do them, and with like fewer snows, we have the perma ice is melting. Like there's so many things that are happening, and all of that impacts sport events. And so I think about it in terms of, what are we doing across a range of things, from site protections to policies that we put in place to how we manage and create our events. To me, that's like the bigger picture of environmentalism.
Thanks, Brie. And when it comes to the reasons why people should care about this topic, it's obvious, right? In many ways. Obviously thinking about the threat to the environment, but are there any specific things that you would suggest that we should be kind of on the lookout for in terms of why we should really, really be interested in this concept of environmentalism and events in particular?
Yeah. So, I mean, we can't host a lot of these events without the environment. Like we just can't. Right. And like, I think about how we're making decisions around events, and like the most recent one obviously is the World Cup in Qatar. Thinking about like, why would we put an event in the middle of a desert where we have to create infrastructure that then counters that environmental impact, right? So, obviously they moved the time so that they, the athletes wouldn't be as impacted by the heat, but also like the things that they put into the stadium and the venues, like to cool people and things, have a counter effect. Even though they tried to do it environmentally friendly as possible, it still has an environmental counter effect. And so why would we make that decision? So that's like one of the first things I like to question is, Why did we even do that in the first place when all of these counter effects had to then happen for us to exist in the environment, to protect athletes in the environment, and then also to keep us, relatively safe in the environment, but then also then adding to waste, adding to carbon emissions, adding to all these things that then make the environment worse. And so, I think, beginning to really be smart and strategic about where we put events is the first thing that I think is really important and why we should care. The other is that what we do, especially with these mega events, is going to have a dramatic impact on our climate and on our environment. So when you bring millions of people together, that's going to have an impact. Even if it's a cityscape that you're in, that's going to have an impact in waste, human traffic. Resources are drained. There's a lot of things that the environment provides that are impacted by these very large events. And so we need to be smart about where we put them. We need to think about the impact that's going to have not only on the environment itself, so site protections, the flora and fauna that we have to worry about, especially for outdoor events and things where we're using the environment to interact with one another, but also like really smart policy and being serious about that policy. So creating venues that are LEED certified and that have environmental protections built into them, being smarter and thinking about what innovations are on the rise or on the forefront that we can start to see that we can use to help counter those big effects. And so those are the things that I think, we can't really do events, and especially a lot of sport events, without the environment. So we need to protect it so it's there for future events. And so it's a really important, especially now with all the discussion around climate change, it's a really important time that events take the lead on that. We can be industry leaders in doing things in a way that still provides opportunities for people to come together, but is also really thoughtful about how it protects the earth in doing so.
And do you think that consumers, when they're at these events, they're obviously kind of engaging in a hedonic mode of kind of leisure, they're probably not thinking about the environment that much. Are there any kind of tips, tricks, ways in which to get people to think a little bit more environmentally friendly? I know that kind of the whole behavioral nudging stuff in hotels, for example, subtle messages around kind of their impact on the environment have been working really, really well. What about events? Is there anything that particularly works well there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually, you're right. I don't think people think about it, and I don't think they think about the sheer impact it can have just when you think about waste that's generated. And one of the things I like to do is have my students, in while trying to get them, because I have them do leveraging exercises, obviously, and how do they leverage that environmental impact piece. And so I ask them to go a full day without any single use items, without trying to generate any extra waste, how they might reuse some of the waste that they have. And like just spending a day trying to do that, they realize how incredibly difficult it really is. And it's a nice precursor to then, how do we think about this at scale? Like, what do we do when we have millions of people coming together, and how do we lessen that impact? I think that there are, I've seen some really positive things that venues are doing by, removing plastics as best they can, trying to remove single service type of silverware and plates and things like that, going to paper or cardboard over and or aluminum over plastic. So you're right. There are things that are changing, but we try to get even farther. Okay, if we have, what are some offset things we can do? So who can we partner with in our local community that plants trees or that is working to reduce and lessen the impact on the earth? And how can we leverage those relationships and find ways to work with that partner to help us in our event? And so those are some of the things that I try to do, is get them thinking about, there's people out there trying really hard to improve the environment and lessen our impact on the earth. Let's partner with those people. Let's get really smart about it. It's expensive on the front end, but on the back end, there's a lot of reward there in terms of, thinking about using facilities that have energy and or LEED certifications, working with organizations that only care about the environment and it's not greenwashing, that they really legitimately have things in place, and only working with those types of companies, and putting your money where your mouth is, essentially, and saying, yeah, we really want to do this, and these are the people that we're going to partner with to ensure that it happens. And then also like signage and, having your staff and your volunteers emulate what you want people doing, helping them understand. I went to an event. I actually did research on this really cool event that's held in our trail systems, in our parks and rec systems, and one of the really cool things that they did was, not only did they have everything labeled very clearly, they also had a volunteer in place that said, oh no, you can't put that in there, you need to put it here. So it's one thing to have composting toilets, and it's one thing to have your stuff separated out. It's another thing to ensure people are doing it right. And so I think that those are important steps that we can begin to do, but also working with larger policymakers and working, joining forces on that side of things to say, hey, we recognize that the service that we provide here does have a major impact on the earth, but these are the things that we're going to do to help mitigate that and give back to the community. And so I think that's what I try to express in my classes, especially.
That was really comprehensive. Thanks, Brie. And that was super good. And just thinking, everyone's tackling this issue from multiple directions, right? You've got event bids that are kind of mandating a lot more stuff around kind of environmentally friendly venues, trying to find kind of incremental gains in kind of the ways in which roofs are kind of shaped and that sort of thing. So kind of it reduces heating costs and that sort of thing. We went to the Paris 2024 venues, and it was really, really cool to just see all the innovations that are going on there, right through to kind of biodegradable tents at Glastonbury, chemists coming up with really, really interesting stuff, right through to the subtle messaging, right through to the volunteers. And so, yeah, people are kind of, there's some really great practice out there. So it'd be really interesting to know, if people wanted to find out a little bit more about this topic area, Brie, kind of where would they look to find a little bit more about, kind of to get some inspiration, I guess, to find out more?
Yeah, there's a number of things. I always start with the United Nations, the Sustainable Growth Development Goals, because obviously there's an environmental piece there, and so I think they have some great resources, and they also connect you to other great resources through that site. So I always start there. The World Tourism Organization is another one that has some really strong tourism, and granted, events are tied to tourism. Obviously, people have to travel to get there. So while it might not be obvious as an event manager, those are some great resources that the World Tourism Organization also puts out. So those are two really nice big flagship places where they have a lot of resources, and then they also can connect you to additional resources. So those are always two great go-to starting points. I also would, academic research. I know it's not flashy and fun to read all the time, but there's some great work out there where people are really trying to look at what are the new innovations, how do we think about this differently, so that's always not the best, maybe the most favorite place for practitioners to start, but there's a lot of great research out there that's being done that can help give you some guidance. And I also would say, a lot of universities have environmental programming. So we have, labs, and we have consulting work that we do. So if you're not sure, and if you wanted to, talk to somebody, universities are also a great resource to you, where you can talk to us and we can help you design a research project or look at you and consult with you on what your practices are. And that can really help you as well. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to really understand how this is changing and who you might go to for help or more resources.
It's so true. Universities and industry just don't work enough together. And, we cry out to work with people in industry. One, because it gives us great data and insights on the ground. But two, we have quite a lot to give. And it's just about, in a sense, translating that into something that's palatable, I guess, and actionable for people, very busy people in industry that don't have that much time to read through the academic stuff in a lot of detail. If we were to kind of think about the future of environmentalism and its linkage to events, are there any kind of key future trends that you suggest that we kind of should look out for, and students or people listening to this now should look out for?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the, I'm always looking for great innovators. So, vacation races, which is the study that I referenced earlier, they're a leader. Are they doing everything great? Not yet. Not absolutely not yet, but they're on their way, right? They're thinking about the impact that their races have on the environment, and then they're working with the local communities to mitigate that and help by planting trees or providing resources that help reduce or reverse what's happening. Composting toilets, composting, things that you can, or having composting available for foodstuffs and things like that. Those are little things that can actually go a really long way. And then there's like the innovators out there. I'm always looking at startups. I'm always looking to see what, founders are coming up with, and then how might they then work with us. Maybe they're not thinking about what they're doing can impact events, but that's a really good starting point, right? And a great way to have an opening conversation. And so there's a lot of founders out there that are trying to change the environmental state that we're in right now, where it's reducing plastics or trying to make sure that plastics don't find their way to the oceans or things like that. But also, thinking about, when we have to make snow, for example, is there anybody on the horizon that is thinking about that and how we can potentially reduce the impact with new technology that maybe, reduces the use of water or, whatever it might be. But I'm always looking for those types of groups that might want to partner or if anything, come in and talk to my students, because I think if they can come in and share what they're doing and that changes one person's mind to go out and do something in the future, like that's really important to me. So those are some of the things I'm always looking for.
Yeah, it's a really good. I always forget that the people sitting in my class are the people that will literally be doing this in the future, and so it's quite incredible to think that one person, you change the mind of one person through a university class. It's not immediate impact, but it's potential exponential impact later on down the line. We have a real responsibility, don't we, to teach the next gen about these new cool tech. There's so much stuff going on. Like there's this one piece of tech that I saw that integrated booking buses and trains and other sorts of public transport. And if they chose the lowest carbon footprint to the event, I'll have to dig it out and give the link underneath the podcast. But if they chose that, then the event would award them with a drink, or they would award them with some sort of promotional offer. And it's like kind of mixing all this together. It's a recipe for success, I think, in some sense. Have you seen a lot of specific solutions like that, Bree, over the last kind of couple of years?
Yeah, I've seen, yes, like you said, promoting walking or biking to the event and then having VIP access essentially to anybody who does that. I think that's really important because it incentivizes a very simple behavior. Hopefully people have bikes or can access to city bikes and get there in that way. And so also working with city bikes, so like if your community has a whole, like New York has a whole biking infrastructure, obviously, so we're partnering for that is another important way you can do that. I've also seen tree planting in the community. I've also seen infrastructure, depending on the size of the event, infrastructure and technology updates that then reduce the impact on the environment. So there's a lot of things I think that we can do. What's most concerning for me, though, is that I just watched a segment on, the coral reefs still dying in Florida now because the temperatures are so hot in the ocean. And I worry a lot about the impact that's going to have on our events in the future, from, heat exhaustion and having to worry about our participants and whether or not they have access to water and shade and the things that they would need to cool themselves down. That's going to add exponential expenses to us as we would try to do these events in this extreme heat. But also the impact that could have on, like I said before, the environment that we need in order to host the event. So if the oceans are changing, is that going to impact waves and what we can do for surfing events and, things like that? Like, what are we doing for winter sports? Like, my biggest fear in the future trends that we're seeing is not necessarily good things that people are trying to do to reverse the stuff that's happening, but this continued change to our climate that is eventually going to be dangerous. Like, you can't host events right now in Arizona. It's too hot, right? And so, but eventually, is that going to impact us? We see a hotter Olympics every time, and so it's like we're running out of places that we can safely hold things that are not going to do harm to the attendees, but also it's just going to change the way that we host events in the future as well. And so those are future trends that I'm not looking forward to having to address, but they're certainly on the horizon. We need to be thinking about them now.
And we see a ton of events that are going on, obviously in the Middle East, that have kind of warmer climates and difficult climates as well. So, I think we're seeing quite a lot of technologies that are coming out in the Middle East to improve the visitor experience and prevent heat exhaustion and all that sort of thing as well. So that's kind of really interesting. One to watch there in terms of kind of innovation and tech. Super. Well, Bree, we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for coming on Inside Events and talking about environmentalism and everything that you talked about, all the kind of like subtle kind of bits of resources, reports, etc. We'll try and kind of collate them and put them underneath the podcast, whatever we can find to provide some kind of sort of further reading. So thank you ever so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks.